Hello everyone, and welcome back to Autonomia, the show where we bring ideas from the libertarian left to everyday people, and foster conversation on what we believe in hopes of proving that we all have far more in common than we are trained to believe. My name is Hayward, and I am your host. As always, our intro and outro music come from a song called A Bigger Cage is Still a Prison by System Failure. If you'd like to look up this song, the band spells System, C-I-S-T-E-M, for political reasons.
There's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky, hear the animals as they go about their lives, feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes, but tonight this cell keeps me enclosed.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much for tuning back in. For today, I have something that I think is important, because we have a world right now that's so full of disputes and arguments and entrenched beliefs that we can sometimes lose sight of the fact that we can, and in my opinion should, talk to each other. Those of you who listen to this show regularly will know that I often call into the Lee Elsey Show. This is a local show, but also the largest and most popular radio show in Connecticut. The host frequently will also guest host on several national radio shows. So this is, to me, a very important place to try to have these conversations, to diversify perspectives, and to really give issues the attention that they deserve. And, I'm very fortunate that Lee is willing to have these conversations on a regular basis and have them in a forum that's very public. So right now I have a call from, probably a few months ago at this point, but it's stuck in my head, especially during the King of Callers segment when I was promoting that effort online to people. One of the things that I would do is send people some of these segments of various phone calls I had to the show, showing that this dialogue can occur. And this one is actually talking with Lee about what masculinity is, and what it means to be a man, and how that affects our lives. And so, to me, it might seem kind of silly to have this conversation, because most people out there may have just a default conception of what masculinity is. But when you actually get into it and start to interrogate those beliefs, you start to wonder, well, what is it actually, or what is it to me? Because, there are a lot of things out there that we think are masculine, but maybe 100 years ago were not considered that, or vice versa. Like I said with Lee, even just go back a couple of decades, and some of the supposedly most attractive people out there were folks in bands in the 80s who all had makeup, long hair, earrings, all kinds of stuff. So what does that mean? Nowadays, or maybe in the early 2000s, that might have been considered not so masculine. Now it's coming back a little bit now, but I'm rambling here. What I'm getting at is, I think this is a really important example of how these conversations can occur between two folks that are actually interested in having that conversation. Because so much of this discussion, especially in the right-wing media space over the past few months and years, especially around the whole increasing prominence around the discussion of gender norms, masculinity, femininity, and what all those concepts mean to us, that's become a big cultural fixture. And so many folks insist on an oversimplified understanding that has a lot of holes in it. And the question to me is, what do you do when you find those gaps in these definitions? Do you modify your definition? Because if you find gaps in it, those are flaws in your definition. Or do you take what might be considered the more fascistic route and eliminate those things that are holes in your definition to conform reality to your definition rather than your definition to reality. I hope you find that interesting, and I hope you find it instructive, maybe inspirational for conversations like this that might happen in your own life. And on a very real and practical level, there are folks in that audience, because it's huge, like we're talking hundreds of thousands of people, there are folks in that audience that probably feel very strongly toward these concepts, and maybe even feel forcefully toward these concepts, because that's how statistics work. Any large group of people, you're going to have a few folks in that audience that might be willing to do something bad, dangerous to other people. And if you can do just a little something to maybe break that bubble, maybe at least there's a chance that one of those folks might be less willing to do something terrible. Maybe not. But at least doing something to disrupt that that perspective. And disrupt isn't a bad word. Disrupt means you bring different perspectives to the table. Because if you have just an echo chamber, you can get in those radicalization spirals that are so easy to do in the age of the algorithm. So try, get out in the conversation, contribute your perspectives, because if you don't, like I've always said, you lose by default. And if you're a member of a population that is more easily able to go into spaces without triggering a bunch of preconditioned responses from people, go for it. Some folks are more or less able to enter what they call hostile territory. And, I don't consider this radio station a hostile space, but maybe people feel that way. And if some folks to start to go into those spaces or into those social areas in the real world, maybe you pave the way for other people to be more able to speak and share their stories and share their humanity. I think there's a lot of value there. So let's hear it. I hope you enjoyed.
All right, Hayward has been waiting a long time, so we'll go to Hayward first on line number 4. Hayward, good morning. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing okay. Glad to be on the show yet again.
What's happening, man?
Well, so initially I was going to call just to build on the discussion yesterday at the end of the show about fascism and its definitions and how it plays into our modern world. But, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least briefly touch on this whole discussion of gender and feminization happening. Because, it's something I've got a lot of opinions about. And, before I became a forest dweller and dressed like a tree most of the time, you would see me wearing pastels and a lot of pink. I had long hair. I wore earrings for a while, and I never felt like less of a man because of it. I just like the way those things look. And, before we talk too much about feminization, did your generation forget what half your musicians look like?
Oh, I know.
It's not as if this is completely new, but even today, it's not uncommon to see me in a skirt in the summer heat, and I've never had anyone give me much trouble about it. Maybe that's because I'm always visibly armed, but do the weapons I carry then add to my masculinity? I mean, the Romans thought that pants were unmanly. I mean, would people go and call the Roman legionnaires feminine? I'm not sure you would. Or the Spartans, for example, these paragons of masculinity that they even had a movie about them. Well, you wouldn't want to see what the Spartans were doing once they turned the cameras off, It's a very complicated stuff. So What is masculinity as a social concept? Is it just one thing or one category? Is it the color of your clothes, the length of your hair? Is it your ability to do violence to others? Or, like everything else in nature, is it a nuanced and blended set of signifiers that can be more or less prominent because of the inherent diversity of life?
All good points, and actually points that some emailers had pointed out as well about the way things have either progressed or regressed from past times to now. And you make excellent points as far as even as recently as the musicians that a lot of us may have listened to growing up. They all wore makeup, had long hair, wore the leopard print tights. Yeah, I mean, listen, you can make arguments all you want. I get it. I just think though that there's been a conscious effort in some cases for some men to move into an area where they would identify more with females than males. Is that fair at the very least?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think one of the things that is different in recent generations is that there's been an increasing push, from my perspective, probably for the better, for people to be more comfortable to acknowledge what they call their feminine side, or to actually say, "Oh, I have feelings," and so rather than just spend all my night at the bar and beat my wife, I'm going to actually talk about my feelings and be a healthier, more rounded human being. You know.
Well,
so
and that's bad in some cases because men take a lot of heat for that sometimes, right?
Right. And so men have difficult lives, and so rather than just repress all of these feelings, maybe we can actually be open with each other and talk about that. Right. And that's another thing that used to be considered only feminine, but why is it that way? Why do we not have some ability to engage with each other and be authentic in what we're feeling, right? Like, why is that robbed from us? How much pain and misery has been caused by us repressing everything and not saying, "Hey, I'm having a bad day today. Like, can we talk about it, or can I just, get some space or something?" So, getting in touch with your feminine side, as they've called it, could also be like, "Hey, I think pink's an okay color," right? Like, there was that whole push of 10 years ago, like, real men wear pink, and to me, that's just kind of silly. It's like, if you like the color, wear it, right?
I think I agree with that. I just think that the men are not. It's a sign of weakness if they show that vulnerable side. At least it has been for at least for a couple of generations.
Right, and so if we all just cling to this collective understanding of, oh, we can never be weak, does that make us better, or does that just make us a bunch of emotionally constipated people that are going to get cancer when we're 50 and ulcers in our stomach? Like, is that better? To me, I'm not.
Be a man. Get cancer. Get an ulcer. Yes. Sorry,
well, right. I mean, like, I think maybe there's even a little entrenched misogyny in that whole cultural attitude of saying, like, we can't learn anything from women and how they navigate the world. Like, come on, there are two of us for a reason. We can learn from each other, and we can mirror some of each other's behaviors if one of us has figured something out. There's some value to that.
Yeah. All right. What else you guys? Is that it today?
Oh, well, so just very briefly on the whole fascism thing. Yeah. So there was the discussion of fascism being a combination of corporate and state power, and that's largely rooted in a quote that's attributed to Mussolini, though there is some debate on its authenticity. And the quote goes, "Fascism is a merger of state and corporate power." And historically speaking, the way that works is you maintain the private ownership of industry, but then they have an outside influence over the government. By contrast, Jim brought up socialism and communism. On the surface, they look similar, but in the communist way of things, the government controls the industry, so you can kind of have that commingling, but there's a different power dynamic there. And they both happened around the same time because there was a primordial soup of ideologies around the 1800s and into the 1900s of just how do we deal with society. So some of these will have commonalities, and they might go in different directions. Or if you look at the history of communism and the history of fascism, you usually end up with a lot of dead bodies, even if they had a slightly different way of organizing it. So is America, as they were saying yesterday, have areas of fascism? Well, you could argue that because of the outsized influence of private industry over our whole world. I mean, think of, for example, the adenosine in the water that you were talking about. Well, how did it get there? Well, most of the time it's because some corporate lobbyist talked to a politician and said, just allow us to dump this in the water a little bit more because it's cheaper. So, yeah, I mean, do we have tendencies of that? Absolutely. And from my perspective, that's why looking out for the warning signs of fascism is always important because, I'm kind of more of what you might call an anti-fascist. It's not really my idea of a good time, so I'm going to certainly do what I can to push against it.
All right, Hayward. Good call as always, man. 860-464-9490. We'll try to give a few other people the opportunity to get in here.
Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast episode. This project is done on a DIY basis on extremely antiquated equipment. And if this is something you'd like to hear more of, and maybe you're feeling particularly generous, you can head on over to patreon.com/autonomia. That's patreon.com/AFTONOMIA. I'm still looking to figure out what kind of benefits I can offer to any of my subscribers other than my undying gratitude. But if you feel like supporting the show, it would be very helpful. I am a father of 2, husband of 1, trying to provide for my family and do whatever I can to make this world a place I don't have to apologize to those children for. I'd really appreciate any support that happens. Obviously, if you can't, I totally get it. I know how it feels to be up against the wall financially. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
'Cause there's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky. The animals as they go about their lives. Feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes. But tonight this hell keeps me enclosed. For if we don't have our freedom, if we are captured by their iron hands, then the vision for fire, it burns so much more bright. There's no justice in the system, a bigger cage is still a prison. Well, I hope that somewhere someone breaks free tonight.